the crux of your campaign. Like you have over 100 policies on the website, but solution number one is your freedom dividend of $1,000 a month, which of course we've gotten a million questions on, and I want to hammer this right now. I want you to get the opportunity to hit, because a lot of it sounds too good to be true. It sounds like there's a lot of like doubt initially, right? So let's start with, I mean, kind of what you're just saying, like why we need it, right? Like what is it supposed to accomplish? And let's start there.
Well, it's interesting. I mean, I can talk about like my own exposure to it and evolution.
Yeah. And then I'll start with the.
Though I will say that I think the first time I heard about universal basic income, I was like, oh, it's a good idea. Like, we should do that.
I thought it sounded like socialism.
Well, the first time I saw it was in the context of reading some of these books on the future of work, like Rise of the Robots and Second Machine Age, and most all these books end up with like, hey, probably gonna need universal basic income. I was like, oh yeah, that's right.
Okay.
So I've always, I mean, I'll be honest,
Right,
like I've always been like, yeah, that's probably a good idea. It wasn't like drop everything and run for president on it, but I can get started. So universal basic income is not Andrew Yang's idea. It's Thomas Paine's idea, Martin Luther King's idea. Elon Musk obviously thinks we should do it. Thank you, Elon. So it's not me. I mean, it's a deeply American idea. Thomas Paine called it the citizen's dividend. Martin Luther King called it the guaranteed minimum income. Richard Nixon called it the family assistance plan. And Alaska has called it the petroleum dividend for almost 40 years now, where everyone in Alaska is getting between $1,000 and $2,000 a year, no questions asked. So if you're a family of four in Alaska, you might have gotten $8,000 last year.
Yep.
And it kicks in like a year after you move there. So if you really want some free money, you can go to Alaska and you can get it the next year. The reason we don't talk about it that much is that Alaska is not contiguous to the rest of the country, or else there probably would be more people taking it away. Yeah. It's a little further away. If you remember, if you watch the Simpsons movie, when they show up, then they're like, "Here's your money." I don't know if you.
I'm not a big Simpsons guy. Sorry.
If you saw the Simpsons movie, you remember the Simpsons moved to Alaska for a minute, and then they were like,
for the money.
Well, no, they moved because they're on the run for something. But
Okay.
then they show up, and then they just give Homer money when he goes in, and then Homer's like, "It's about time."
Okay, so all right, $1,000 a month, great. You talked about some of the benefits. Let's talk about the elephant in the room. The number one thing is we got online. Can you explain how you pay for it? This question is from Tifasone. I'm probably, apologies if I messed up your name, but it's a very, very cool name. So this is what he said. How would you like us, if asked by our friends, families, or strangers who want to know about how you pay for the freedom dividend? Explain how you pay for it in 3 or 4 sentences. We got a lot more time than that, but how do you simply say how we pay for this thing?
All right, so there are 4 ways you can think of getting the money. But number one is, right now we have the biggest companies in our country that are paying 0 or near 0 in taxes. Amazon, $1 trillion tech company, 0 in taxes. Netflix, 0 in taxes. Google moves a lot of earnings to Ireland. Like, they don't pay 0, but they pay a lot less than you'd think. Parking tens of billions of dollars in other parts of the world. So number one, it's like, how do you pay for it? You give us a slice of every Amazon sale, every Google search, every Facebook ad, every robot truck mile, hundreds of billions in new revenue. And so this is the thing that maybe these numbers help people. It's like someone looks at it and says something like Andrew, like, how can you pay for that? Isn't that, let's call it like 2.4 trillion a year or something like that? And then you say, wow, that sounds like a lot of money. Our GDP is 21 trillion. And then someone's like, like, when people think about like these numbers, it's like we are the richest, most advanced economy in the history of the world. If you put it in the size of our economy, then let's call it 2.4 doesn't sound as bad. But if you start with this 2.4, if you have this mechanism where we share in the gains of the biggest winners of the 21st century economy, generates, let's call it 800 billion plus.
Right. And what's the total cost of this plan?
Let's call it 2.4 trillion, which is about right.
2.4. And 800 billion would you get from
the value added
Amazon,
tax and the rest
right.
of it. All right. So
which
that's
every other country has. Developed country.
Every other developed country already has it.
So people say it's crazy.
Oh no,
Or
like
the
any
crazy
economist
one.
looks at it. Like the tax foundation was like, yeah, this is actually the best mechanism. Everyone kind of knows it. The only reason the value-added tax not been on the table in America is because the companies have been lobbying the crap out of it to try and keep it off the table. Like that's really it.
Right.
All right. So then you're like, okay, 800 billion is not 2.4 trillion. So what's up with that? And you're like, oh, well, here's where some of the magic occurs. After you put the money into our hands, we spend it. It ends up growing our consumer economy quite significantly. The money circulates over and over again, and then we get more tax revenue for the fact that there is like more purchasing, more traveling, more
Right.
business starts, more hiring, like all that stuff generates hundreds of billions of dollars, depending upon how aggressive you get with like how much the growth is going to be. Let's call it 500 billion, which is reasonable. So then you're at 1.3, so you have another 1.1 you're looking for. Then you save hundreds of billions on things like emergency room healthcare that we spend like
Yep.
hundreds of billions on now. Incarceration. I was with a corrections officer in New Hampshire who said we should pay people to stay out of jail
Yeah.
because it's so costly when they're in jail. And this is a corrections officer, mind you. So you save billions on incarceration. You save billions on homelessness services. You spend billions essentially on what we currently are putting in place to try and pick up the pieces very often.
Right.
So then you're down to, let's call it like a little bit less than $1 trillion left. And then there was one study that showed that if you were to alleviate extreme poverty in this country, you would increase our GDP by 700 billion just on the basis of better educational outcomes, better health outcomes, better mental health. And then, so this is like a massive investment in our human capital. If you're a company, all the time as a company, you go around saying, hey, we have to invest in our people. We have to invest in our people. Because the thought is if you invest in your people, then they'll be more productive and then your company wins. We've all at least heard that. I mean, if you work for a good company, if you work for one of the rich companies, they actually send you to some ridiculous training for like
They
a
do
week.
invest in you, yeah.
Where like, and then you were like, hey, did I learn anything in this training? Sort of. But like I really appreciated it, and then so like it sinks in. Like you actually feel that. And then in the public sector, we try and disinvest. We try and be like, let's not spend any money on that person.
Right.
And then we end up getting stuck with the bill later. So if you invest in your human capital, you end up increasing the size of the pie by hundreds of billions conservatively, and then we get a lot of that value back, especially because it's literally us. So to go through the list again, fair share of the winners of the 21st century economy, cost savings on emergency room healthcare, homelessness services, incarceration, and various social ills. Economic growth, actually reverse that. So I'll say economic growth number 2, incarceration, homelessness services, and emergency room healthcare is number 3, and like the other things that we spend money on. And the number 4 is better health outcomes, better education outcomes, stronger human capital, better mental health, better decision making, higher productivity, higher entrepreneurship, etc. So if you add these 4 up, you come pretty close to the 2.4 trillion headline number. And again, you have to bear in mind that like this is money in our hands. That if you're a company and you say, hey, we're going to pay a dividend, no one ever says, well, that's a waste of money, because by definition, it can't be a waste of money. It's like it's the money getting returned to shareholders. In this case, the money literally goes to us. We're the citizens and shareholders of this country. It's actually the best possible use of proceeds.
Right.
Because if the money goes to us, then we're the best determiners of how to allocate those resources.
One of the things
So that was a little bit long-winded. I'm sorry about that.
but you summed it up.
But I summed it up.
Yeah. One of the things you say a lot is one of the biggest lies in America is that we don't have the money.
Oh yeah, Zach knows this too. Biggest lies in America is we don't have the money. And there's like this, there really is some very strange stuff going on where people, another way, it's like people say like, how do you pay for it? You could say this: how did we pay for the $4 trillion bailout of Wall Street? Do you remember voting for that? Remember getting the referendum being like, do you want to vote for the $4 trillion bailout? Do you remember anyone caterwauling about where you're going to get the money? Do you remember that? I don't.
Nope.
No, it was like, hey, the banks need $4 trillion. let's do it. Let's pull that.
Right,
Let's
check.
let's pull the lever. And during that time, and it was a tough time. Like literally, our society was on the precipice. So you can't Monday morning quarterback it too much. But if you had a choice between bailing out the banks and trying to keep more Americans in their homes, like let's say forgiving some of the mortgage debt and the rest of it, in my mind, you should definitely have done some of the latter. But that is not what we did. We said $4 trillion for the banks, and then
That was that.
yeah, that was that. And so if someone's like, "How are you going to pay for it?" It's like you can be like, "Well, like I don't remember anyone like stressed about how to bail the banks for $4 trillion,
Right.
or just now with the latest round of corporate tax cuts, it was like 1.5 trillion. And then people look around being like, where do you get the money? It's like, if you gave us the money, and we all know this, if you give us the money, we'd spend it. It actually goes back in the economy like exactly the way you'd want it to go.
Right.
If you forgive 1.5 trillion in corporate taxes, how much of that gets in the economy? I'll tell you how much got into workers' hands. 6%. The majority of the 1.5 trillion went to share buybacks and like boosting stock prices and the rest of it, which ends up benefiting the top 20% of Americans. And so, we're doing things in the most dumbass, inefficient way possible. And the only reason for it would be like if your goals were not actually to do right by your people. It's
Right.
it was just to like enrich a
Make
select
money.
group of Americans, because it's obvious if you wanted to do right by the economy and our citizens, you just put the money in the hands of people, and then that'd be like it'd just be much more effective as an economic boost. And we're gonna get there because Ray Dalio just came out yesterday. I don't know if you saw this stuff.
I did not see this.
So Ray Dalio looked up and he called it like the great sag. He said we're going to be in this great economic sag, and that central banks are going to be unable to do much about it because interest rates are all already at very, very low rates. So the financial image they use is like pushing on a string, is that if you've already lowered rates to as far as low as they can effectively go, and you hit a rough patch, then you can't just lower rates because they're already pretty much at zero.
Yep.
And so then he said, you're going to have to resort to fiscal policy. And you know what fiscal policy is? Spending money. And so the question is like, how are you going to spend the money? And I'm suggesting, you know how we should spend the money? Give it to shareholders, give it to Americans, and that would be the surest way to strengthen our both way of life and economy. This woman said to me, and it was in, I'm happy to say it was in Iowa.
Right.
She said to me, like, she gave me a hug and said, if we all got $1,000 a month, I don't think we'd ever have a recession again. I mean, that was actually,
Wow.
yeah, I know. And
And you
I
think
mean,
about it, like maybe, yeah.
because you know what we do with that
Recession
money
we
is
define differently.
yeah, I mean, we just end up spending it, and then we have to, like have different economic measurements. A slightly different story, but
So,
but yeah, it's like it's clear to most Americans, common sense, that the most effective way to actually bolster our economy would be to put money into consumers' hands where it gets used.
so
I just want to finish this
keep
thought.
going. Sorry, I didn't know you-
No, because 78% of Americans living paycheck to paycheck.
Right.
Almost half can't afford an unexpected $400 bill. You put money into that American's hands, they're going to spend it.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And they're going to spend it on basic things that keep the economy humming. If you put $1,000 into Jeff Bezos' bank account, economic non-event. No one would even notice. You just change one digit in like one of his accounts somewhere. No one would even notice. You put $1,000 in the hands of the average American who's just like, trying to make ends meet and like trying to figure it out, like maximal impact.
So, one of the things I will say is when we were first starting, we had looked at millions of different ways to pay this, or hundreds of different ways to pay this thing, and we found like the ones you have, we thought like the most efficient, most effective. But there's a lot of ways you could actually pay for this thing.
Yeah, I mean, there are other things too that are part of, and we don't talk about it because there's like, they complicate life.
Right.
But data dividend, it's like if we get data check, it like gets built into the freedom dividend. Our data is now worth more than oil. How much of that value seeing it? We have a carbon fee and dividend, but that's that money's getting used to try and move us towards more renewable.
Right.
But there are a lot of different revenue sources, and right now we have just like the dumbest system, and then we're arguing over how to sort of like tweak the dumb system. and it doesn't make any sense. Like I said to, someone, Amazon, $1 trillion tech company, Jeff Bezos is worth 120 billion or so. It's like I could increase the marginal tax rate 70, 75, 80%. How much of Jeff Bezos' $120 billion would I see? Next to nothing of it, because he's not an idiot. He's not going to be like, I'm going to get paid $10 billion my paycheck this year. You get $8 billion of it. Like, of course not. He probably pays himself something nominal. Most of his wealth is in Amazon stock.
Right.
If you want to get some of that money, what you do is you put a toll on Amazon sales, and then you pump, tens, hundreds of billions of dollars into the public coffers. It's like a much more effective way than like crowing about the income tax. The income tax would nail like the town dentist. Like that's not where the money is. I mean,
There's some, but yeah.
there's some, but like the trick that they're pulling is they're trying to pit us against each other and ourselves. It's like that's not like there's a saying where it's like, why did I rob the bank? Because that's where the money is. Like you have to go where the money is,
right.
And like the town dentist has a little money.
It's not your guy or gal.
But Jeff's got his 120 billion and his company's worth $1 trillion, and anyone who's in that space complains about the fact, and this is totally legitimate. Amazon doesn't even need to make money. How can you compete with a company that doesn't need to make money? It's pretty freaking hard. The ironic thing is someone who complained to me about this was like a Walmart employee.
Jeez.
Walmart's like, how can we compete with Amazon? They don't even need to make money. And like everyone was like, wow, Walmart just like squashed the heck out of all the mom and pop retailers. And they were like, how can you compete with Walmart?
Smoked, yeah.
And then they're looking up at Amazon being like these guys don't even need to like report quarterly profits, and they still get $1 trillion valuation. If Walmart reports an unprofitable quarter, their valuation gets cut like very, very quick. It was.
So this is the system.
There's a system. It's like we're in this system of hyper capitalism run amok. Tim O'Reilly calls it super money. Says it's very hard to compete with super money, which is like money that doesn't even need you to like actually show profits. And
right.
So if you're in an operating environment where it's like I have to like scratch and claw for every nickel and dime, and then your competitor is like I can do whatever I want, then.
So all right, I think we covered paying for it. One of the biggest questions you got is on inflation. What happens to an economy when you put $1,000 a month in everybody's hands? And so Ed asked this question. He said, "What about inflation? For example, a landlord knows you're getting $1,000 a month more a month. He increases rent $1,000 a month." Or I think other things like part about the VAT too is like, will people increase their prices? Will big tech increase their prices? So I think those are two actually separate questions.
Yeah, they are.
But let's start about inflation, like landlord sticking to you on rent and everything going up.
Yeah. All right. So there are three core sources of inflation in American life that are making us unhappy. Number one is housing. Number two is education. Number three is healthcare. Maybe you could swap 2 and 3, but those are the big three. Those are the three that make us miserable.
Right.
Just about everything else in the consumer economy staying the same, even getting cheaper or better. So that's obviously media and entertainment, clothing, electronics, cars, food for the most part. Prices have been fairly stable. And this was even true post-bailout when we printed $4 trillion for the banks. There was not massive inflation. Now, so then why are housing, education, and healthcare getting so much more expensive?
Right.
It's because they're constrained in various destructive ways. So I'll go with education. Why is college 2.5 times more expensive than it was when I was growing up? It's because colleges have added new administrative layers and then just passed the cost on to parents. And then parents felt like they had no choice but to pay it. So then they turn to the government. The government says, here are the loans. And so now we're up to 1.6 trillion in school loans because there's just no competitive pressure on these colleges. They just keep on ratcheting up.
Right.
Healthcare, similar. Why do healthcare costs just keep going up and up to the sky? Because you have private insurance carriers, their business model is like, I'm just going to charge you more this year. The employer feels they have no choice but to pay. They eat it. They make it up by not hiring people and turning everyone into temp gig and contractors.
Right.
So like we're paying a hidden cost there. And so there's a principal agent problem too, because if you're the consumer of healthcare, it's not like you're paying market rates. You can't shop around. So housing is the one that, what's his name? This question? That's fine.
Just pull it up. Ed, sorry.
Ed. So housing is the one that Ed's asking about, and housing is the one that people
I always ask about.
People home in on
Yeah.
the
It
fastest.
makes sense. If you told me I was gonna get everybody's getting $1,000 a month, make the natural landlord would be like, oh sweet, like I can just jack up rent because people have more money.
So, the first thing is that like no sane landlord would ever jack it up by like 1,000. Like you know what you would do is you might be like, man, I can get away with like
Get away
a little
with
more.
a
I can
bump,
get away
yeah.
with like a bump. So even now, it's not like the landlord's like, I'm going to charge you 100% of your income. Like that doesn't make sense. So even at the most extreme, a landlord would try and stick it to you for like some fraction of it. Let's call it like $300-400 like on the upside. So then let's say they stick it to you to that tune, and you're getting $1,000 a month. You would do like anyone else would do, which is you'd be like, well, let's see what else is out there. That's one reason why all these other markets have remained relatively stable in prices, because it's very, very competitive. Now, housing's competition is getting constrained by the fact that you have essentially like NIMBY regulations that are keeping
Right.
people from developing affordable housing, and you have limited housing stock available, particularly in robust economic areas that people feel like they need to live in to access certain jobs. So the first thing you do, Ed, is if they say, hey, I'm going to stick it to you, then you say, all right, what else is out there? And you would see if there are other reasonable landlords out there. And if you're another landlord, you'd be like, maybe I'll be reasonable, and then like I'll get a good tenant. But let's say there are no reasonable landlords. Let's say they all try and stick it to you. then you'd look up and say, okay, I've got $1,000 a month. Maybe I can enlist like a friend of mine. Together we have like 2,000. Maybe there are a few family members. It's called 3,000.
spouse, right? Yeah.
Or a spouse. And then maybe it makes more sense for us to find some fixer-upper someplace, split the house, and then try and get out from under the thumb of these landlords. And this $1,000 a month that we're all getting is portable. It's not contingent upon my living next to where we all work. It actually makes us much more mobile and dynamic and able to make better adjustments. This actually makes it harder to exploit us, not easier. It's not like the landlord's like, ooh, you got $1,000 a month. Now I'm really gonna stick it to you. It's like, hey, I've got $1,000 a month. It's like, if you stick it to me too bad, like we can actually adjust and adapt.
Yep.
So that's the short is that, like, are they going to try and stick it to you somewhat? Yes. Are you now more able to adjust and adapt and like respond and like not be exploited? Also, yes. Are there specific issues around housing supply that we should try and help with, like create more incentives for affordable housing development? I am such a big fan of things like innovations in communal housing, and this could be like the guy in me, but I really like the smaller apartment footprints and like the the urban stuff. Like I've been in one of the like a container
Turned into a house.
turned into a house, and like these micro housings. Maybe there are probably other people that dig that stuff too, but we or even at like raising a family with Evelyn, like we look up and say, you know what would really help parents with young kids is if you were like in a place where you cook a meal once a week and then other people cook a meal once a week, and
Communal
like you're
living
not
stuff,
communal living stuff. Like we should 100% be investing in different ways to try and solve the housing problem. And right now a lot of it is that the financial incentives all hew in one direction, which is I'm going to make the nicest apartments for yuppies that I possibly can, and because that's the way I can extract maximal financial returns.
Correct.
It's again a situation where, well, like, is this what we want? And if it's not what we want, then we need to create different types of development incentives.
Yep.
And in many cases, you'd hope to try and help communities address this, because many of the communities end up with local zoning regs that advantage the people with the most clout in those
Right.
communities, which are never obviously the poor people in that community who are looking for affordable housing. Like it's always going to be like the affluent in the community who want to keep things quiet and the
Right.
same and keep their property values high.
So that big part of Ed's question is like, won't landlords jack up the rent? If they did, it's still portable, right? Like that,
Yeah, and
that's a big takeaway.
It's still portable, and it's not related to your place of employment, which right now is one of the things that's keeping a lot of people stuck in place.
Right. And then on prices, right? Like what's preventing like Burger King from jacking up the cost of a burger?
Yeah, so one of the jokes I tell is like, if you went into your favorite restaurant after the freedom dividends passed, thank you, America, and the prices were 80% higher, it's not like you're cost insensitive. You'd be like, wait, this thing was like $10 yesterday. It's like $16 now. Like, that doesn't make any sense. And then it just takes one restaurant that doesn't decide to gouge you for you to go there, and then all the other restaurants like, oh snap, I guess I can't raise my prices by 60%.
Right.
So you wind up with, in most marketplaces, like competitive pricing, and you saw this again where post bailout, when we printed $4 trillion, there was minimal inflation in consumer products.
Right.
If you look at it, and this is a very, very common misconception. So the three big causes of inflation right now are housing, education, and healthcare. Those are not being driven primarily by people having lots of money, particularly in housing, in healthcare, and education.
Right.
They're being driven by market constraints.
Mm-hmm.
Like us having buying power, it does affect prices at the margins, but it doesn't. It's not the main driver in those three.
And you say a lot. The $4 trillion bailout didn't drive up prices.
Yeah, it didn't.
Yeah.
There's minimal inflation.
The bank bailout,
Yeah, and like what's happened in the education thing, it's not like everyone got rich, so like college got really expensive. It's just that they just jacked up the prices, and now we owe 1.6 trillion on it. So the buying power is not driving some of the price spikes we're seeing.
Now, how about this question? I think it was my reaction as someone who's kind of a moderate, at least before I joined, right? And I think you get this a lot. Is Logan asked this question: is like, do you feel innovation will be affected if companies are on the top or taxed with a freedom dividend? But also like so there's at the company level question but also on a personal level, like, is there motivational work that's affected, right? Like, what if you give somebody $1,000 a month? Like, are people gonna work less? Is this like gonna make us lazy?
Well, there are a bunch of Silicon Valley techies that are supporting the campaign that love innovation. They're literally like almost the embodiments of innovation.
Yeah.
I mean, most people know that, like, Elon Musk endorsed me, but it's not just him.
There's a bunch of them, yeah.
Yeah, Alexis Ohanian, Sam Altman, Jack Dorsey have all either donated or are supporting in various ways. Some of them might even like ask a question.
Like today,
yeah. So these are people that know that it's a much more positive environment for innovation when people feel like they're participating and sharing in it. Markets function better.
Yeah.
Everyone, it's just like, it's a really bad environment for innovation, like the winner take all extreme economy, someone like Trump in the Oval Office and people turning on each other. That's a very bad innovation environment. So it's one reason why I have a lot of techies who are behind me, knowing full well. And when I go to some of the techies, I say, hey, we automating away the jobs? Like, oh yeah, we are. And it's like, hey, do you want to like try to pay some more to like keep our society together? A lot of them are like, yeah, I would. It's like, it's not like people are just, like dragons on piles of gold coins. It's like they're freaking parents, they're Americans, they're humans. Like Jack grew up in the Midwest. Jack's like, things not looking so good. So, I want to put words in words in his mouth. But, it's like they're human beings. They're families. And they know that it's a better environment for innovation if we're still actually excited about it.
And the studies have shown people don't work less. And there's places that.
Oh yeah, the working less thing. Yeah, like so, two groups worked less when they got extra money.
Right.
New moms who spent more time with their kids, which I don't think we're sad about, and teenagers who graduated from high school at higher levels, which I also don't think we're sad about.
Yeah.
And so someone actually in South Carolina asked me, it's like, hey, what's it going to do to work ethic? And here's like the way I genuinely feel about it. It's borne out by the data. If you're hardworking now and you're watching this right now and you get $1,000 a month, are you really just going to like stop working? Of course not. Some of you might even work harder because you'd be like, hey, now I have like some stuff to play with. If you're really lazy and you get an extra $1,000 a month, are you still going to be lazy? Probably. You know what I mean? Like, like it's like $1,000 a month does not transform someone's nature. Like, but there are a lot of edge cases where right now people are not working or not trying because they think it's useless. And if you had a foundation, then you might be like, maybe I'll actually give something a shot, at least at the edge sometimes. Like, I don't have any illusions. It's like if you're really lazy right now, post freedom dividend, you'll probably be really lazy the next day too. Like, $1,000 a month is not is not going to transform most people's nature.
Right.
But I, the data bears this out too. You see a lot of people that are on the edge actually working harder. And one of the things that struck me about some of these studies is that you see kids in particular flourishing more when these families get the money because they become more conscientious. And what conscientiousness is in the context of child development is like, if I do something right, then good things happen.
Yeah.
And one of the problems in like a super stressed out, financially strapped household is that you could do something right and then it does not matter. And then you're like, well, it does not matter if I did something right. So I don't need to be conscientious. Like the money actually puts enough of a structure in place where like good things will actually result in like some sort of positive feedback loop, which ends up being incredibly positive for kids' development in particular. So there are so many ways that it would be helpful. It's going to decrease our right now epically high stress levels, make people more rational, conscientious,
Right.
future-oriented, optimistic, more trusting, actually. Like these are all universally well-documented impacts of getting this cash where, and you all can instinctively imagine it, like if you're getting $1,000 a month, like you'd be like, oh, I mean the first month you'd be like, yeah, and you'd probably do something like, a little bit.
But yeah.
Yeah, but then like over time, it would just get the boot off your throat, and then in real life, it's like when your kid is screaming or whatnot, like you have extra reserves to be like, okay, I'm gonna be a good role model and be like, I'm not gonna scream back at you. I want to be like, well, why are you upset? Like, what's going on? Or like,
Right.
you have like a tough day. You're just like better able to respond and make better decisions. I mean, it's not about the money. It's about what the money does for us.
You say that a lot. It's about more than the money.
Yeah, it's about everything but the money. It's about our health, our decision making, our relationships, our kids, our mental health. What we'd want to do with our lives. And the amazing thing is that this is just a popular choice. Like, enough of us get together, we can do it. Like, there's nothing stopping the majority of citizens of a democracy from saying we should have a dividend of $1,000 a month. And you know what's really interesting is, like, I felt this after the debate, is that I think a lot of Americans are waking up to this. They're just like, wait, we can do that?
Yeah.
That's a thing? Like, and I'm like, oh yeah, it's a thing. And then you can almost sense there some people being like, shh, it's not a thing. It's not a thing. Like, let's
Don't talk about that.
yeah, let's like not talk about it. But Americans are very smart and savvy and being like, wow, we can do that. Like, and then, some people reflect on it too. I'd tell you, the financial bailout really did open my eyes to a lot of things.
That's when you started VFA, right?
I started literally financial bailouts affected me so profoundly where I quit my job and spent 7 years building a nonprofit that was a labor of love for me, and is still a labor of love for
Right.
some very, very incredible people that are doing awesome work on it every day. And I genuinely thought, I was like, Venture for America, this is my grand sort of it's like
Legacy.
grand legacy, or the best contribution I can make to society is try and train hundreds, eventually thousands of entrepreneurial people who will do positive things. So
And
the
now you're running for president.
so the financial crisis lit a fire into me, being like, oh my gosh, things
Right.
are. But it also it really did shake me up. It's like, wait a minute, we just did what for who? We just it's printed $4 trillion for these guys. What the heck just happened?
Right.
And this country preaches individual responsibility, and then it's you have literally the lack of accountability was shocking to me, where you had these people who are getting paid tens, hundreds of millions of dollars, being like, who could know? It's well, do you want to give back all the money you've ever made? Being because theoretically you were getting paid to not let this sort of thing happen.
Yeah, they made a lot of money beforehand.
Yeah, I made a lot of money beforehand, and then they're none of them just stepped up and were to me men or leaders about it, being I should have known. This is probably the grandest screw up in the history of mankind. We're wrecking millions of lives, so I should take accountability and walk the plank. But there was zero of that. There was I don't know what happened
You
here.
make me angry talking about. I want to do, so it's 11:20 essentially. We have 10 minutes till we take a break. What I want to do, I wanted to like talk about one of the most common things you got was the freedom dividend, and then the rest of the day talk about everything else that you always talk about that I get to see all the time, because you talk about more than just the money. Like you have 110 policies on the website and about a whole bunch of other things. So I want to do this. I'm going to do rapid fire right now. What I mean is like try to answer them as quickly as you can. But
Okay,
and I think the rest of the day we can do longer form. But I think it's because there's a lot of like questions people have about the freedom dividend that we don't always get to talk about.
Okay.
Number one, homeless people, they get the freedom dividend.
So when a government, yes, they do. And
Yeah.
when a government agency interacts with a homeless person right now, the first thing they try and figure out is, does this person get some government benefits? Because that will help them help that person. With a freedom dividend, everyone will know every person's entitled to $1,000 a month, and you would see massive resources deployed to help the homeless population immediately.
Yeah, that was from Jean Ann. Reese is asking, military, would they get it?
Yeah, of
When
course.
join the military.
Freaking, I mean,
Of course.
Yeah,
I mean,
you'd be getting it pretty much like before you showed up to the military, and like you go in the military.
We have a lot of policies, but I'm just rattling off. Annie wants to know, does it stack on top of Social Security?
Yes, it does, Annie. It stacks on top of Social Security. Social Security is what someone called it's like a forced annuity. And one of the things that moved me towards this was that if you were a mom and you took decades off to raise your kids, your Social Security benefits are lower because you have less of a work history. And we're facing a retiree crisis. 50% of Americans will never retire. Who wants to live in a country where you have old people just working till the day they die and struggling all the time? And we have to shift our economy towards human needs. The freedom dividend stacking on top of Social Security, $1,000 additional a month. So think about that if you're near retirement age, because the fact is most Americans right now will never be able to retire unless we make this kind of move.
Be the greatest expansion of Social Security in history.
Yeah, it would make our environment so much more human too, because you'd end up investing massive levels of resources in helping people like retire and live with dignity.
Oh my goodness. Yeah.
Because right now you talk about it's like, what's the future of work? It's like, home health care aides. It's like, well, half of Americans will never retire, so I'm not sure how that's gonna. It's like you'll actually just have them working at convenience stores till they die.
Does everybody get it? That's from John.
Yeah.
Over 18, everybody gets it. Rich, poor.
Yes.
Why is it important to give it to everybody and be universal?
So in the Alaskan experience, everyone in Alaska gets the money, and it's universally popular. There's no stigma. There's no I'm paying for you. There's no monitoring. There's no incentive to underreport your income. And so you get rid of the stigma and administration. And if we're funding it through a value-added tax, the truly wealthy will be paying much, much more. So the reference I make is like, look, if Jeff Bezos is paying billions of dollars into the system, which he would, and then we're trying to send him $1,000 a month to remind him he's an American, that's fine. That's a win.
Yep. I just lost this question, but it was how would it affect tax levels? Like, would you get taxed on it?
So the freedom dividend itself is non-taxed, but it may push you. So if you're making like 50, then like with a freedom dividend, you'd be making 62. And so the increment on top, you might end up taxed on, but the freedom dividend itself is not taxed.
Got it. And Denise had a question. It's fun. I think it has two parts. One is basically like, why is it the same across different areas of living?
Sure.
And the second part of that question is, will it go up? Will it be tied to something
Inflation.
like that? Yeah,
Yeah.
inflation or CPI.
Oh, wait, so it's tied to inflation, CPI, which is like measurement of core inflation for goods. So it's going to be 1,000, then let's say it's 2%. The next year it'd be like 1,020.
Right.
So won't that be wonderful, America? In terms of making it the same across geographies, obviously the cost of living is very, very different in different parts of the country.
Right.
But one, if you live in a very expensive area, like you're frankly choosing to live there often because you can access certain economic opportunities. Like there are reasons why people are choosing where they live. The other thing realistically is it would be next to impossible to monitor people's whereabouts. and we know Americans would be like, I live in the expensive place, and then like go, to the woods. So if you had $1,000 a month, it's portable. It's actually a way to make our population more dynamic in both directions, because there are people who are stuck in very expensive areas that feel stuck that would move someplace less expensive if they have passive income. And there are people who are in less expensive places that are like, I would actually give Seattle a try if I thought I could try and make it work and survive for a little while and look for something. So it actually ends up helping dynamism in both
More
directions,
dynamic, right.
but also it would realistically be completely impossible to monitor.
Cheaper to implement, right?
Yeah, and you'd wind up with like crazy games playing if you were like, it's dependent upon like what neighborhood you live in or something. I mean, you can just imagine that.
Would a couple questions, like Kurt has one here and a couple others talking about the value-added tax being a regressive tax. So does a VAT, or does the way you pay for it hurt poor people or people with lower incomes?
Well, in a vacuum, if you just had a VAT, then it might hurt people who are just trying to make ends meet. But if you're putting $1,000 a month into everyone's hands, it increases the buying power of 94% of
Right.
Americans. The other thing is that you can tailor the VAT so it exempts certain consumer staples. You can have the VAT fall more heavily on luxury goods. Like
There's ways to adjust it.
yeah, there are ways to adjust it where
So what Tina's asking is like, would a raise price on basic foods for?
so you could exempt various
diapers.
things.
You could exempt.
Yeah, you could exempt like consumer staples. You could do a lot of different things. Like there's so much value changing hands in America now that and you want to go to where the money is.
A lot of questions, or not a lot, but a number of people say, why is this not socialism? Why is it not communism? I've heard you answer this a million times.
Yeah. So this is capitalism where income does not start at zero. It makes markets function better, makes businesses function better. If you're a small business in a community right now and everyone has another $1,000 a month to spend, like you're probably hiring and expanding. This is good for markets. It's good for business. This is not like 1,000 economists endorsed it in the 60s. The CEO of JP Morgan just came out for like a related idea on negative income tax. So it's like this is the least communist thing around. And if you want to get technical, socialism is defined as when the country nationalizes means of production. So that's like the U.S. government takes over Ford.
Right.
That is not what we're talking about here. We're talking about just putting buying power into people's hands.
Correct.